In 1969, a professional wrestler walked into Bruce Lee's school in San Jose. He'd broken 17 arms in the ring. He didn't come to learn. He came to prove a point. What happened in the next 4 minutes didn't just end a challenge. It ended a career. This is what the students who were there still talk about. In 1969, Bruce Lee's Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute in San Jose wasn't listed in any phone book. You couldn't just walk in off the street. It wasn't a dojo with a sign and open enrollment. It was a rented space above a drugstore on Bascom Avenue, narrow staircase, wood floors, no mirrors, no trophies. If you trained there, someone vouched for you. If Bruce didn't want you there, you didn't come back. The students who trained under him during that period described the same atmosphere. Quiet, focused, no belt ceremonies, no tournaments, just fundamentals, repeated until they stopped being techniques and became reflexes. Bruce didn't teach forms for the sake of tradition. He taught efficiency. Every movement had to justify itself. If it didn't work under pressure, it didn't belong. San Jose in the late 60s was still rough around the edges. The martial arts scene was fragmented: karate schools, judo clubs, a few kung fu sifis operating out of back rooms. Most of them kept to themselves. Bruce was different. He'd already fought publicly before. In Oakland, years earlier, he'd accepted a challenge from a traditional master and won decisively. That fight had consequences. It pushed him to question everything he'd been taught. It led him toward what would eventually become Jeet Kune Do, the style with no style. But by 1969, Bruce wasn't looking for challenges anymore. He was refining, teaching, testing theories in real time with students who were willing to pressure test every concept. No compliant partners. No choreography. Just honest resistance. Across town, in the same city, another reputation was building. His name was Rick. Last name doesn't matter because it's been lost to retellings, buried under the weight of what happened. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a champion. But in the semi-professional wrestling circuit that toured through California in the late 60s, Rick had a reputation that mattered more than titles. He broke arms. Not accidentally. Not in the heat of the moment. Deliberately. 17 confirmed, according to people who followed the regional circuits. Some said more. It was part of his persona, the enforcer, the guy promoters brought in when they wanted a match to feel dangerous. He wasn't the biggest wrestler on the card. He wasn't the fastest. But he knew joint locks, and he knew how to apply them past the point of mercy. Outside the ring, Rick carried that reputation like armor. He believed in it. People stepped aside when he walked into a room. Bouncers didn't ask questions. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence did the work. He'd heard about Bruce Lee. Everyone in the martial arts world had by then. The Chinese guy who moved too fast for cameras, who'd been on television, who trained Steve McQueen. But Rick didn't buy it. He'd seen theatrical kung fu before, flowery movements, no real application. He'd grappled with judoka, boxers, street fighters. He trusted what he could feel, and what he felt every time he cranked a joint lock was total control. In Rick's mind, Bruce Lee was a performer. Talented, sure, but unproven in the kind of fighting that mattered. The kind where size, strength, and pain tolerance decided outcomes. Wrestling wasn't about looking good. It was about making the other person quit. Rick didn't hate Bruce, he just didn't believe the legend. And in 1969, disbelief was enough of a reason to test it. Rick didn't call ahead. He didn't send a formal challenge letter like in the old stories. He just decided one afternoon in late spring to drive over and see for himself. He brought 2 friends, not for backup. Rick didn't think he'd need it. But because this was the kind of thing you wanted witnessed, they parked on Bascom Avenue just after 4 p.m. on a Thursday. The street was quiet. A few shops, a diner, foot traffic thinning out as the afternoon stretched toward evening. The staircase leading up to the institute was unmarked except for a small sign. Jun Fan Gung Fu. By appointment only. Rick climbed the stairs. His friends followed. At the top, a door. No window. He knocked. A student opened it. Mid-20s, lean, calm expression. He looked at Rick, then at the two men behind him, and asked, "Can I help you?" Rick's voice was even. No aggression, no posturing, just direct. "I'm here to see Bruce Lee. I want to spar with him." The student didn't react with surprise or defensiveness. He just nodded slightly and said, "Wait here." The door closed. Rick and his friends stood in the hallway. One of them asked if this was a good idea. Rick didn't answer. Inside, the student walked over to Bruce, who was in the middle of explaining a trapping drill to 3 other students. The student leaned in, spoke quietly. Bruce listened, didn't change expression, then nodded. He walked to the door and opened it himself. Bruce Lee stood 5'7", 140 pounds. He was wearing a black t-shirt and loose cotton pants. No uniform. No ceremonial presentation. He looked at Rick, then at the 2 men behind him, and his expression didn't shift. Calm. Neutral. Observational. "You want to spar," Bruce said. Not a question. A confirmation. Rick nodded. "If you're willing." Bruce stepped aside and gestured into the room. "Come in." Rick stepped into the room. His 2 friends followed, staying near the door. The space was smaller than he expected, maybe 30 feet across. Wooden floor, scuffed from years of footwork. A few heavy bags hanging in the corner. No banners. No Bruce Lee posters. Just open space and the smell of sweat and old wood. There were 5 students inside, all men, all in their 20s or early 30s. They stopped what they were doing. No one spoke. They moved to the edges of the room without being told, clearing the center. Bruce closed the door behind Rick's friends. He didn't lock it. He just moved to the center of the room, hands at his sides, and looked at Rick with the same neutral expression. "Before we start," Bruce said, his voice quiet but clear, "I need to know what you want from this." Rick didn't hesitate. "I want to see if what people say about you is real." Bruce nodded slowly. "And if it's not?" Rick shrugged. "Then I'll know." Bruce studied him for a moment. Not with hostility, not even with suspicion. Just observation. He was reading Rick's posture, his breathing, the way his weight distributed across his legs. "Okay," Bruce said. "We'll spar. Light contact. No strikes to the face. If someone taps or says stop, we stop immediately." Rick frowned slightly. "Light contact?" Bruce's expression didn't change. "You want full contact, we can do that. But I need to know you understand the risks." Rick exhaled through his nose. "Light contact, no problem." Bruce turned to one of his students. "Time us. 4 minutes." The student nodded and moved to the edge of the room. Rick stripped off his jacket and handed it to one of his friends. Underneath, he wore a white tank top. His arms were thick, veined, built from years of grappling. He looked like someone who could impose his will physically, and he'd done it enough times to trust that ability completely. Bruce stayed in his t-shirt. He rolled his shoulders once, loosened his neck, then took a stance, left foot forward, right foot back. Weight centered. Hands open and loose in front of him. Not a traditional kung fu stance. Not a wrestling stance. Something in between. Adaptive. The student's voice broke the silence. "Go." Rick moved first. He didn't lunge. He didn't rush. He stepped in with a measured advance, hands reaching for Bruce's lead arm, trying to control the wrist in close distance. It was a basic setup secure, a grip, drag into the clinch, take the back or sweep the leg. Bruce's arm wasn't there. Rick's hand closed on air. Bruce had rotated his forearm inward and slipped the angle, pivoting his body just enough to make the grab miss by inches. Rick adjusted immediately, reaching again, this time with both hands. But Bruce's elbow folded inward, collapsed the space, and redirected Rick's momentum sideways. Rick reset. No panic. He was used to people defending. He stepped in again, this time changing levels slightly, hands lower, trying to get under Bruce's guard. Bruce's hips shifted back. Not a big movement, just enough. Rick's hands found the front of Bruce's shirt, but couldn't secure a grip. The fabric slipped. Bruce's weight was already somewhere else. Rick tried again, and again. Each time, Bruce moved not away, but around. He didn't retreat. He didn't create distance. He stayed just inside Rick's range, close enough to be engaged, but never where Rick expected him to be. It was like trying to grab water. One of Rick's friends shifted his weight near the door. He'd seen Rick grapple before. He'd seen him control people, lock them down, make them quit. This wasn't that. This was something else. Rick's breathing deepened. Not from exhaustion. It had only been 90 seconds, but from frustration. He was a tactile fighter. He trusted what he could feel, but he couldn't feel Bruce. Every time he thought he had an angle, it disappeared. Bruce still hadn't attacked. He hadn't thrown a strike, hadn't countered with a lock of his own. He was just moving, reading, adjusting. His hands stayed open, relaxed, redirecting Rick's energy without absorbing it. Rick decided to commit. He shot in low, driving forward with his legs, reaching for Bruce's hips with both arms a wrestling takedown. If he could get Bruce to the ground, the fight would shift. Bruce didn't sprawl. He didn't drop his hips back like a wrestler would. Instead, he turned his body at an angle, hooked his forearm under Rick's armpit, and guided the momentum past him. Rick stumbled forward 2 steps, off-balance hands grasping at nothing. He caught himself before he fell, spun around quickly, reset his stance. His face was flushed now. Not from exertion, from realization. The student's voice, 2 minutes. Rick's jaw tightened. He stepped in again, this time more aggressive, hands faster, trying to overwhelm Bruce with volume. Grab the arm, grab the shoulder, grab anything. Bruce's hands flickered, not strikes, redirections. Each time Rick reached, Bruce's fingers touched his wrist, his forearm, his elbow. Just enough to change the angle, collapse the grab, neutralize the entry. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't violent. It was surgical. Rick tried to muscle through it. He lunged forward, grabbed Bruce's left wrist with both hands, and pulled hard. For half a second, he thought he had it, but Bruce's wrist rotated. His elbow dropped, and suddenly Rick's grip was on the outside, not the inside. Bruce turned his body, slipped his arm free, and stepped to Rick's blind side. Rick spun to face him. His chest was heaving now. His friends were still silent. The students along the wall hadn't moved. No one was smiling. They were just watching. Bruce's expression hadn't changed. He wasn't taunting. He wasn't showboating. He was simply there, responding to what Rick gave him. Rick wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He could feel it now. The gap. Not in strength, not in toughness, in something else. Something he didn't have a word for. He stepped in one more time. Slower now. More careful. Hands reaching for Bruce's collar, trying to establish a grip he could build from. Bruce let him touch the fabric this time. Let him start to pull. Then, in one smooth motion, Bruce's hand came up from underneath, trapped Rick's wrist, rotated it outward, and locked the elbow joint in a straight line. Rick felt the pressure immediately. Not pain yet, but the unmistakable sensation of a joint reaching its limit. He tried to pull back. Couldn't. Bruce's other hand was on his shoulder, controlling his posture, keeping him extended. The lock wasn't violent. It was just there. Complete. Inescapable. Bruce's voice, quiet. "Do you feel it?" Rick nodded. His throat was dry. Bruce held it for one more second, just long enough for Rick to understand, then released. Rick stepped back, breathing hard. He looked at Bruce, then at his own hands, then back at Bruce. The student's voice, 3 minutes. But Rick didn't move forward again. He stood there, arms at his sides, chest rising and falling. He wasn't injured. He wasn't hurt. But something inside him had shifted. He'd felt what it was like to be completely controlled without force, to be outmatched without being overpowered. Bruce lowered his hands. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't say anything. He just waited. Rick glanced at his friends. They were staring at him, not with judgment, with confusion. They'd come to see Bruce Lee tested. Instead, they'd watched Rick chase shadows for 3 minutes. Rick turned back to Bruce. "I'm done." Bruce inclined his head slightly. "Thank you for coming." Rick picked up his jacket from his friend's hand. He didn't put it on. He just held it. He looked at Bruce one more time, opened his mouth like he was about to say something, then stopped. There was nothing to say. He walked to the door. His friends followed. None of them looked back. The door closed. The room was silent. One of Bruce's students started to speak. Bruce raised a hand, just slightly, and the student stopped. Bruce walked over to the heavy bag in the corner, picked up a towel, wiped his face, and draped it over his shoulder. Then he turned to his students and said, "Let's continue." Within 3 days, the story began to spread. Not from Bruce, not from his students, from Rick's friends. They told it in bars, in gyms, at wrestling shows. And every time they told it, the story was the same. Rick didn't get hurt. He didn't get thrown. He didn't get hit. He just couldn't touch Bruce Lee. And after 3 minutes of trying, he walked out. Rick himself didn't talk about it. Not publicly, not privately. When people asked, he changed the subject. When someone brought up Bruce Lee's name, Rick would nod and say nothing. His silence said more than any explanation could. Within 2 weeks, Rick stopped taking open challenges. He still wrestled. He still competed in the regional circuits. But the swagger was gone. The reputation for breaking arms faded. Not because he stopped being capable, but because he stopped needing to prove it. One of his training partners from that time later said, "It wasn't like he was scared. It was like he realized something, like he'd been doing math wrong his whole life and someone showed him the real formula." The students who were in the room that day never bragged about it. They didn't tell the story to inflate their own status. When people asked, they described it the same way every time. Calm, factual, no embellishment. One student, years later, put it like this: Rick came in thinking it was a test of strength. Bruce showed him it was a test of understanding. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Bruce never mentioned the incident. Not in interviews. Not in demonstrations. Not in any of his writings. For him, it was just another afternoon. Another person who needed to learn something. The lesson wasn't about humiliation. It was about showing the difference between forcing an outcome and allowing it to happen. By the mid-1970s, the San Jose incident had become part of Bruce Lee's legend. It was told in martial arts schools across California. It was whispered in wrestling gyms. It was referenced by fighters who'd never met either man but understood what the story represented. It wasn't about Bruce Lee defeating a wrestler. It was about the moment when brute force met effortless control and learned the difference. Rick lived another 30 years. He never became famous. He never wrote a book. He never gave interviews about that day. But people who knew him said he changed after 1969. He became quieter, more thoughtful. He started teaching younger wrestlers not just how to win, but when not to fight. One of his students asked him once, late in his life, if the Bruce Lee story was true. Rick looked at him for a long time before answering. "It's true," he said, "but not the way people think. I didn't lose a fight that day. I learned what I didn't know." Bruce Lee died in 1973. The Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute in San Jose eventually closed. The building on Bascom Avenue was demolished in the 80s. There's a parking lot there now. But the story remains. And it remains because it wasn't about violence. It wasn't about dominance. It was about the moment when someone who trusted strength completely discovered that strength alone was never the answer. Rick never broke another arm after that day. Not because he couldn't, because he didn't need to. And in the end, that was the real lesson. The one Bruce didn't have to say out loud, the one that only made sense after you felt it for yourself. Control isn't about force, it's about understanding. And once you understand, everything changes. The witnesses are gone now, the room is gone, the men are gone. But the story remains, told quietly, passed down. A reminder that some lessons don't come from winning. They come from realizing what you never understood in the first place. And that realization, for Rick, began and ended in 4 minutes on a Thursday afternoon in San Jose. In a room above a drugstore, with a man who weighed 140 pounds and moved like water.